dangerous and true forest horror stories. My name is John, and I'm 38 years old. I live in northern Canada. I was 36 years old at the time, which is a little more than 2 years ago. I live by myself in a pretty big cabin that is next to a few other homes. It's very quiet in our small town, and everyone knows everyone else. I would camp, hike, and shoot all the time if I lived in the middle of a forest, though. My younger brother lived just a few hours to the north, and these kinds of things were something we did together all the time. We were going to go hunting one last time before it got cold outside. I told my neighbors about my long trips so that they could keep an eye on my house and everything, which is why I told them I was going on Monday night. The next morning, I packed my bags and drove further north. It was near the end of fall, so it was clear that it was cold, windy, and snowy. Though I only meant to be gone for a few days because my brother and I wanted to go shooting for that long. Around the middle, it started to snow. It wasn't strange at all, but as we drove a little further, the snow got heavier and piled up on the narrow road. My car wasn't a junkyard find, but it also wasn't a big snowplow truck either. It was a normal pickup truck that was only a few years old and worked well in all usual situations. The snow layer slid under my tires though, and the truck ended up on the side of the road in several inches of snow. I was only 20 minutes away though. Even though it wasn't a very bad crash, I knew right away that this was going to be hard to get free of. Of course, I tried quickly a few times to just drive the truck away, but it wouldn't move. The tires were spinning and couldn't hold anything. I put on my heavy jacket and ran outside to see what I could do. Adding to the chaos was the fact that the road was slightly steep and snow was still falling heavily. I knew I couldn't get this out by myself after a quick circle around my truck. I went back inside and thought about what I could do. I couldn't call my brother for help because I didn't have service, but I sent him a text message anyway in case it got through. I had two real choices: stay put and hope that someone drives by and helps, or leave and walk to my brother's town, which would take 2 to 3 hours. I knew that this road wasn't used very often, so it was unlikely that someone would drive by and stop to help. I was afraid that if I didn't act quickly, I would be stuck in the middle of a huge empty forest on a cold night while the sun was still out. So, I chose to walk. I took my hunting gun and the pistol I had on my belt out of my bag and threw away everything I didn't need for the walk. I only had to follow the road, so I didn't have to worry about getting lost. But being stuck outside in the cold was. As I walked for 30 minutes, the fall started to get lighter. The snow on the road wasn't too deep yet. The only thing I could think about as I walked was how silly everything was and how unlucky I had been. But this bother soon turned into something worse. After going around the bend in the road, I saw that a big tree had fallen over into the road. With each step, I could see that the tree stump was on the side of the road I was walking on. I was shocked at how clean the cut was when I got close to it. It was clear that someone had cut it down on purpose with a saw or an axe. Right away, I took a worried look around at the snowy forest around me. I was pretty sure that someone was trying to do something bad with this, but I didn't know how bad they were. It could have been a sick joke to make people turn their cars around, or it could have been done to steal from people or something even worse. I also didn't know if this was brand new or old. The road wasn't used very often, so it would have been taken away in a few days. I chose to keep walking around it, almost running to get farther away from the possible trap. It was too late for me. A man yelling from behind me told me to wait by saying, "Hey, hold up there." When I turned around, I saw what looked like 2 hunters standing next to the downed tree. With long guns on their shoulders, they waved their hands at me as if to get my attention. From about 100 feet away, I just stood there and thought about what to do. Again, one of the men yelled for help moving the tree, but I was beginning to add things up at this point. When I looked around, where were they? They had to be somewhere hidden. Also, I never saw a car, so I don't see why they would need help. I turned around, sped up, and didn't pay attention to their calls. For 1 minute, they didn't stop yelling until the falling snow made their voices faint. I finally got to my brother's house safely, and we went to the closest police station to tell them about the downed tree and the strange hunters. On the next day, a cop came with us to help me get my truck. The unfortunate thing is that the windows were broken, and everything in my car was stolen. I think I have a pretty good idea of what happened now that I've had years to think about it. There is no doubt that the men cut down the tree in the middle of the road so they could rob or even hurt people who came down the lonely road. I think they were hiding deep in the forest and waiting for the sound of a car coming toward them. When they heard that sound, they would know it was time to come out and attack. For some reason though, I feel very fortunate that I got stuck on the side of the road and had to walk. That probably kept me from meeting someone even scarier and more dangerous. Story 2. I grew up in a town in a pretty rural part of the United States, but when I was growing up, there were only a few patches of forest left because cities were growing so quickly. 2 of those patches were surrounded by housing buildings. I hated walking through those trees because they made me feel weird every time. There was a road at the end of our street that went around the back of the houses and through the woods. It was the quickest way to get from our street to almost anywhere else. It used to make my heart beat fast every time I crossed this trail, but I had to because my mom sent me to the shop to get something, or I had to walk to school. Because he knew how scared I was of ghosts, my older brother would always tell me that the woods were full of them. During the winter, when it was almost dark when we got home from school, bigger kids would hide behind trees to scare the little ones and demand money, or even cell phones. Because I was a girl, this was even scarier. I wasn't scared of the woods anymore, since I'm an adult. A few days after I got back to my city last year, it started snowing pretty hard. Because my mom is such a nice person, she called our senior neighbor and told her she could walk her dog instead of tripping on the wet sidewalk. My mom would do nice things for the neighbor all the time. I told my mom I could do it for her because I knew she didn't like being cold and I wanted to do something nice for her while I was there. I was walking a Labrador dog through the woods on the same road we had been on. Even though it doesn't snow often where I live, I brought my brand new DSLR camera with me to record the view. I stopped to take a quick picture near the start of the walk. A faraway scream made me jump as I tried to set up the camera. I went about my business anyway because it sounded like kids having fun. I was really enjoying the walk, but it was getting cool and I didn't want to worry the neighbor's dog too much. When I heard something running toward us, I was about to turn around. For a short time, we couldn't see because we were partly in the woods, and it sounded like someone was running along the main road. The thought to hide came to me out of the blue, so I did what my gut told me to do. It took me a moment to think before I left the road and hid in the bushes and trees. Perhaps another worry was that if a thief saw my camera, he might think I was an easy target. When I pulled on the dog's leash, it paused, but then it ran after me into the bushes, just in time, because someone was coming up the road a few feet away. I got on my knees and put my head on the Labrador's. I didn't get a good look at him, but I could tell he was a tall man in a brown jacket and a black cap who was moving quickly. He also looked a little nervous. He was looking all over the place quickly and had his hands in fists. The dog was nice and quiet while the man left. Once he was out of sight, the dog and I went back onto the trail and I decided to take a few more pictures before we went home. While we were on our way back, a loud helicopter broke the quiet. It was easy for me to see once we were out of the trees and behind the houses. There, I saw a police plane flying around some trees close. I took the dog back to the elderly friend of my mother without any problems. I didn't think about the walk again until my mom turned on the morning news the next day. It was a local station, and the big story was that police were looking for the man who stabbed 2 women on a lonely path last night, and one of them lived. The path they had marked went through the forest I had been walking in. It was said that the attacker was tall and wore a dark jacket and a black cap. That's when I realized I had seen a criminal running away from the scene of the crime. My gut feeling and my worry about my camera were the only things that kept me from being stabbed in the middle of the forest. Story 3. When I was a kid, my parents never let me go camping. They begged me not to go even after I turned 18. When I was younger, they never told me why, but now they did. It looks like my parents went camping in the Upper Peninsula when they were still dating. Up there, my mom's uncle owned some cabins, but my dad said living in cabins wasn't really camping, so they brought a tent and other camping gear. However, my mom still chose to remain near the rooms in case something went wrong. They took a short walk around the cabins and then went down a trail that led to a small lake. From there, They went off trail just far enough that no one could hear or worry them, but not too far that they'd get lost. They pitched their tents and went swimming in the lake. They had a great day all around. But on the way back to their tent, they saw a huge black shape in the trees. They stopped and thought about it for a while. The animal was a bear, and it was just walking around. That thing turned around and looked at my parents. It stared at them for a while. Then it kept going. My dad saw one in real life and said it was pretty scary. It was really big, at least 400 pounds. As my parents walked by, they kept looking back to make sure it wasn't going to do anything. The bear kept staring back at them for short amounts of time, which I guess isn't totally normal, but also not that strange either. When it got dark, my dad built a fire and cooked food. He told me that this is where things began to change. Later that night, while they were talking in their tent, they heard something moving outside. They sat there quietly and tried to figure out what it might be. The footsteps were big and didn't sound like people. They heard a big bang and the rustle of plastic as the metal cooking pot hit the ground outside. It was getting closer and closer. After that, it sounds like it tried to eat the leftovers in the pot before throwing it away. Low rumblings broke the quiet, and heavy steps got closer to the tent. From the bottom of the tent to the middle, where they stopped for a moment, big sniffs went. The big animal, which my parents thought was the bear from earlier, let out a loud snort on the tent. As the bear began to sniffle again, you could see the mark on the ground where its nose had been. Then, as if to see what it was, it pressed its huge paw against the thin plastic. My parents didn't say a word the whole time because they didn't know what to do. It went to the front where the zipper was and sniffed the ground at the very bottom where the zipper had a small hole. Then there was a short period of quiet. Then it hit the tent hard with its paw, smashing into the top of it and causing the plastic to bubble. Thank goodness it was just a test, because they could hear it jump backwards, and the tent quickly popped back into shape. For a few more minutes, the big bear could be heard walking around the campfire before quickly running off into the woods. They stayed up all night and got up early the next morning. That they were lucky the bear didn't actually attack the tent, because it could have clawed its way in if it wasn't so scared, my dad said. People aren't sure what the bear was trying to do because those bears don't usually attack people. Either way, it was scary. I never wanted to go camping again after hearing about that event. Real scary stuff from abandoned places. I was in my early 20s at the time, and I didn't have many friends. It was mostly just David, Andrew, and me. Most of the time we spent together, we just talked or went off to explore different things while walking around in the nearby forest. But Andrew came over to my house one night and told me about this creepy old building that one of his friends had told him about. He said it was off a path in the woods not far from here. Of course, I asked him where it was. Andrew said he didn't know and that his friend hadn't even gone there. I was pretty excited about this, and so was David. We both called him to tell him, and he seemed pretty excited too. Even though it was 5 o'clock, the sun wouldn't go down until 7, which would make things even more exciting. Andrew and I got some basic things together, like flashlights and snacks, and then we went to David's place to get him. I parked the car next to a nearby food store. It was only a short walk to the edge of the woods. A half-mile trail was said to lead to a small lookout, but the abandoned house can be found by going past the end of the path for a few minutes. We knew this, so we found the start and kept going down. Along the way, we passed a few people who were going backwards. To be honest, I started to feel a little less excited because I thought this was all a joke. How could we not have known about this place before? The path looked like it had a lot of people on it. Anyway, we kept going and got to the point in the end. At this point, the sun was still partly up, but the woods were getting darker every minute. The lookout was a quick stop for us to get our flashlights. After that, we went past the area and into the woods. Not until about 15 minutes in did we all start to get irritated. We had been going through thick trees and bushes and mostly dark conditions for a while and hadn't seen anything. In a mean way, David asked Andrew, "Are you sure this isn't just a stupid joke?" His answer, "No, this guy was serious, trust me," was his best attempt to reassure us. The next second, we heard a nearby bush moving, and we all turned our flashlights toward the sound right away. See the bush moving around like an animal jumped out of it or something. It made me jump a little. We could see an old building in the background right behind it, though. It made me feel excited all over again, and we all made our way to it. One thing that was strange about the building was that it didn't seem to fit in a forest by itself. It looked like a small house for work. Maybe it was a place to work with wood in the past. I'm not sure. The old front door made of wood was lying on the ground in front of the building. But as soon as we walked inside, the worst, most disgusting smell hit us all. We all looked at each other, clearly nervous but also interested. There were 3 rooms on the first floor. The first one was a big room with a wooden table or desk in the middle of it. A lot of trash and really rusty tools that had been left behind were sitting around. David led me down the hall to the other 2 rooms, both of which had closed doors. The smell got stronger as we got closer to the door. Andrew had to step back and put his shirt over his nose because it was so strong. While he moved his flashlight around, Andrew said, "Guys, we should just leave. That smell is unbearable." It didn't matter to us, though. It did start to make me feel really bad. I pointed my flashlight at the other door and took a few steps toward it, while David opened the other door and entered the room. David screamed and quickly ran out of the room, which made both Stephanie and I jump. After this, there were several loud thumps coming from behind the closed door to the 3rd room that shook the building. We ran out of the house quickly and didn't stop until we were out of breath. Andrew asked himself, "What the just happened?" from time to time. Guys, I swear to God, there was a body on the floor in that room. David was going crazy and looking everywhere. I could tell by the look in his eyes that what he had just seen had really hurt him. I told them we had to keep going and that I thought there was someone hiding in the 3rd room. I think we got out pretty quickly because we were just running in the way we knew led to the road. When we got back to the car, I took us all to the police station a few blocks away, where we told them what happened. It was clear that the cop who took our account felt bad about us, like we were stupid for even going there. It might have been a bad idea, but we had just told the police officer that we thought we might have found a murder scene, and he was acting angry. Anyway, they sent a few police cops down. We waited in our car outside the police station for more than 2 hours for news. Finally, I got a call, and we all went back inside to talk to a group of officers. There were spots of blood and signs that someone had been there recently, but no one was there. Now, though, they seemed to be taking things more seriously, and they asked all of us more questions. A couple of weeks later, they found what they thought was the body David had seen, buried badly a few hundred feet from the empty building. Maybe they found that the person was already dead when they brought them to the building. If so, I guess that's where they hid the body before throwing it away. I don't think the case went very far, and I'm not even sure if they ever found any real suspects. It was still a crazy experience, and the thought of being so close to someone who might have been slaying someone scares me to this day. Second story. Detroit, Michigan is where I live. Detroit has some of the most empty buildings in the United States, in case you didn't know. I cannot say for sure why, but I was raised in places that had these old, run-down buildings nearby, so I was used to it. Many people would hang out in them or look around in them for fun. It was the norm. Philip was my best friend in middle school. We both became interested in these empty buildings when we were in middle school. We wondered what had happened there before it was left empty, and what might still be inside. We knew it was risky to go explore them, but since we were newly teenagers, we felt like badasses, so we tried not to be scared of them. We knew that gangs sometimes hung out in empty neighborhoods where everywhere is next to everything else, so we tried to stay away from those areas. But there were a lot of other buildings nearby, most of which were out in the woods and not connected to anything else. So we started to look into those. We went down to maybe 3 or 4 over the next few months. After a few weeks, we would make each one our hangout spot until we found a new one. That's when things started to go badly. The cement road Philip and I were on was overgrown and cracked. It led to several empty houses that we had already seen. This time, though, we went further down to find a new and interesting place. As we walked further along the path, we realized we'd been going for almost 5 minutes and hadn't seen another house. They were all only a minute's walk apart. We kept going, not knowing what to expect, with this in mind. However, there was still a clear road, so it had to lead somewhere at some point. After about 5 more minutes, we reached the end of the concrete part of the walk. A faint dirt path, on the other hand, went on as far as we could see. Even though it was just trees, we were sure it had to lead somewhere, so we kept going. We finally got to the house in just 1 or 2 minutes. It looked strange. It looked like a townhouse, but a townhouse this far away wouldn't make much sense. It was locked from the outside, and the front door was shut. But the garage door was cracked open, giving us a few feet of room to crawl under. I checked the metal garage door and hit it a few times to make sure it would stay in place. Then we both got down on our knees under it. Inside the garage, there wasn't much except some trash and dirt. The door to the house was closed, though. The thing wouldn't move, no matter how hard I pushed and turned the knob. We both asked, "Hey, could you help me with this?" and pushed until we were able to get through. We saw a big table pushed up against the door as the first thing we saw. I looked at Philip like I didn't understand, and then we both climbed over it and went into the kitchen. When we stood there, we could see what looked like the living room and a hallway that led to stairs going up. The place wasn't in bad shape, though. There wasn't much trash inside, and it was mostly clean. But we knew someone had been there before because the dusty wooden floors had a lot of tracks on them. A quick, soft bang came from the other side of the house as we walked down the hall. There was a sound like something small had hit the floor. We looked at each other and stood still in the hallway, ready for anything else. Philip might have been worried, but I was getting pretty worried. But the front door was right in front of us, so I slowly walked toward it after a moment of quiet. A little more than halfway there, the house shook with the sound of metal scraping against metal, followed by a huge bang in the garage. We ran out of there after I opened the front door. I could feel my energy rushing through me, and my heart was racing. When we got back to the path, I turned around and saw that the garage was now completely shut. We ran almost the whole way to Philip's house. The two of us had no idea what had happened. Even though Philip thought it was just a chance that the garage fell while we were there, I wasn't so sure. If someone set up the place as a trap, they might have been waiting for people to come in through the garage and then shut the door on them. What else could have caused a table to block the door while the garage door was hanging open? Whether they shut the door because they thought we were still inside, or just to scare us since they knew we got out, is unknown. But we never went back to find out. And since then, we've only gone to close places that aren't deep in the woods. Third story. Jack, my best friend, and I always had our own little spots where we could hide from everyone else. It could be a corner of the playground or the nearby skate park. We took our comics and left for a while when we were sick of the adults or our brothers being around us. We built a treehouse in Jack's garden and spent a lot of time in it after a few years. But when his younger brother came up to join us, we often went into the woods instead, because their mother was there and we couldn't kick him out. We spent the whole day outside with our books and flashlights. As the day went on, Jack's brother and his friends started to use the treehouse more often. We didn't agree with his mother at all when she said we were getting too old for it. We still had to find a new place to hide. We got our things together one day and went deeper into the woods than we had ever been before. We tried to make a new shelter, but it wasn't even close to as cool as the treehouse, so we were sad when we got home. The next day, my mom sent us back into the trees to walk our dogs, Sammy. To give the search a second chance, we went even further than before. Sammy, on the other hand, wasn't very interested in finding the best spots, and he never even waited for us to decide how good a spot was. He ran off again one time, but he didn't come back. The first person to notice was me. After calling, looking, and whistling for 30 minutes, I finally called my mom in a panic. She quickly put my mind at ease and told me I would probably find him soon. He had done that before, and every time he did it, he ran back. Even though it was getting dark, Jack and I kept walking. As soon as we turned on our flashlights, Jack told me to stop. He said he heard barking, and I did too, while I stood still. We quickly went to where it came from and saw Sammy barking at what seemed to be nothing in front of a small stone house. "Bud, what do you have there? We've been looking everywhere for you." I grabbed the leash and Sammy growled at something. I put Sammy's collar back on the leash and we both started walking away. We agreed that Sammy had helped us find a place to hide after all, as we took one last look at the building. The next day, we came back. We had already finished dinner and chores, so it was getting dark. Our only things we took with us were flashlights, phones, and batteries, because it was going to be dark. The stone building was a single, almost square structure with a metal door that creaked, a corrugated iron roof, and no windows. Inside, there was nothing, and the floor was the same cold stone. The next day, we brought over some old pillows, blankets, and even a battery-powered lamp. We forgot all about the treehouse and read in the little building with the metal door open on the last few days of summer. It didn't bother us much, so we shut it down when fall came around. It didn't really matter since it was dark outside now. The inside of our car had also been updated. Lots of small lights were strung above our heads, and there were pictures all over the room. We thought this hideout would last forever. We had to go there every day, even when it rained. When it rained, the sound of the raindrops hitting the iron roof was the best thing ever. It ticked away in the background while we both listened to our own music through headphones. We were both listening to the same music on my phone one day while lying on the cushions and leaving our homework in the corner. It rained a lot, and the wind blew around the building. My phone died after a while, so we could no longer listen to music. Jack, who was at home and ready to do anything to avoid doing his homework, jerked back when the door suddenly creaked open. He stopped singing, looked at each other, and then at the door. I didn't think much of it, and as I reached for my notebook, I heard footsteps coming from behind the building. I remember that we were both pretty scared. I was hoping it was someone just exploring the woods for fun, but it was pouring rain, and we were pretty deep in the forest. But before he could answer, we heard footsteps running around the building, and then the door slammed open. A lot of wind and rain came into the room. When Jack screamed, I was shaking too, and we both couldn't move. Once we looked into the woods and saw that no one was there, at least not anymore. We stopped. I finally got the strength to get up and shut the door. After that, we agreed to leave right away. When we got home, wet, we decided not to go back to the hideout at night because we didn't know who had opened the door and didn't want to stay another night to find out. In fact, we still don't. True horror stories about being alone at night. That was about 10 years ago. I worked at a graveyard. It was pretty easy and the money was good. I only had to drive around in my truck and check to see if any kids were getting into trouble. As time went on, I got used to how creepy the job was because it was the same every night. I had a normal night at work and got off at 6 a.m. and went home. Most nights I didn't go to bed until about 11 p.m., and my boss called me while I was getting ready at 10:30 a.m. I told him I hadn't seen anything last night when he asked me if I had. After that, he told me that someone had written on a grave, but I was sure I hadn't seen anything. Certainly not a bunch of kids who are usually the ones who do this. Anyway, he asked me to help him clean it up, and I said yes because I felt like I should. When I got there, I saw that I had been wrong about how bad the writing on the grave was. This wasn't just a small piece of writing. All over the stone were marks and writings that were very bad. It was even worse when I finally read who the person was when we were cleaning up. I won't say the child's name because I want to protect their privacy, but he was only 8 years old when he died a few months ago. I felt angry and sad in a way I had never felt before. Who would do that to a kid? I hung out with my boss for a while we looked at some TV tape. But this cemetery was very big, and the camera we had was on a small house where funerals were held. Also, this happened a long time ago, when cameras were not what they are now. We didn't see anyone. The graveyard is owned and run by the city, so my boss told the town's office. Over the next few weeks, they sent some new guys to go watch with me from dusk until dawn. Things didn't happen during those weeks. I didn't see anyone or any graves that had been messed up. One of the guys rode with me, and the other stayed near the door. I became good friends with the person who watched me. What the defacer looked like was something we thought about and talked about. After a while, it seemed like we'd never find out. There wasn't much going on anymore, and it looked like the problem would be solved for good. In the end, the other watch guards left because there wasn't much going on, leaving just me. Things didn't happen for another week before they did again. At the start of my shift one night, I drove all the way to the back of the cemetery, got out, and started my walk. I had to do this to see if any graves had writing on them or anything else. I knew something wasn't right when I got close to where the child's grave was. It was very dark, and I was only a few hundred feet from the child's grave, but something didn't seem right. I looked that way for 30 seconds, feeling a little uneasy. Even so, I moved closer and shined my dim flashlight all over the area. When I was only 100 feet away, I shined my flashlight on the child's grave one more time. It wasn't very bright, but I could make out a black figure lying still on the ground next to the grave in the dim, foggy blackness. Of course, I was terrified. It was hard for me to tell if it was a dead body that had been dug up or someone who was still alive and trying to hide. I slowly moved closer. When I was about 40 or 50 feet away, the figure jumped up and ran into the dark field of graves, disappearing in a flash. I almost had a heart attack. I was stunned, terrified, and confused as I stood there alone. Soon after I calmed down, I ran back to the truck and called the cops. After that, I went back to the child's grave. Be careful. What I saw was very scary. There was a hole in front of the gravestone. The hole wasn't very big, and it didn't look like it was dug with a shovel. It was only about a foot deep at most. No matter what, someone tried to dig up this child's grave with their bare hands, and it made me sick. Unfortunately, we never found out who did it, so I don't know what they were trying to do. Don't worry though, it never happened again. The town hired 2 new full-time workers, and one of us always watched over that grave while the other 2 looked around the area. During the day, more people were watching over the city as well. That is still the worst thing I've ever seen while working in a graveyard. No ghosts or other supernatural things, just awful people. Second story. My job is to be a community police officer in a southern Las Vegas neighborhood. If you don't know what this job is, it's not at all like being a police officer. I'm a normal 25-year-old guy who drives a small patrol car around nice areas to keep the people who live there safe. Like this a lot around here, where there are lots of nice areas next to a dangerous city. Along with my patrols, I have to report certain violations of the law in the neighborhood. For example, bushes in some neighborhoods need to be clipped every week, so if I see a bush that is too big, I need to report it and leave a note at the house. It's silly, and I think it's strange that people like living in those kinds of areas, but I have to say that it's my job, so I can't really complain. Anyway, I work mostly from 8 p.m. to 3 a.m. It's a strange shift, but that's how they plan things for some reason. Before this, I had never seen anything strange. I would only really see groups of teens doing stupid things in parks at 1 a.m., but something very upsetting happened to me last week, and I can't stop thinking about it. I was on my regular patrol, which meant going along a certain path at the start, middle, and end of each shift. The time was about 10 p.m., and it was pretty quiet outside. This was my midship watch. I have to check the neighborhood pools on the way to make sure they are locked for the night. I parked my car in the small lot and went to the gate. I walked quickly inside and checked the pool area to make sure no one was still there. I locked it when I got back outside. While I was walking to my car, I saw a man in a hood sitting on a park bench not far from where I was. He looked like he was just looking at the ground with both hands in that pocket. To be honest, I thought this guy was just waiting for his drug source. I wasn't sure though, and I didn't care. I got back in my car and kept going on my way. The neighborhood is big, and the trips probably take an hour to finish when there is no traffic. As soon as I was done, it was almost midnight. I only had to drive around the areas for the next little while. For a while, I drove the car aimlessly through the streets. When I got back to the pool, I saw that the man was no longer sitting on the bench. I slowed down the car and looked around the park's paths just to see if I could find him. I couldn't. I kept going without giving it much thought. As I drove by the dark, empty park, I couldn't help but feel uncomfortable. Something didn't feel right. I kept going for a few more minutes until I came to a stop sign and saw a man standing on the side making like he was going to cross. After a short time, I realized he was the same hooded man from before. He crossed slowly, but he stopped in the middle and turned around to face me. He quickly walked up to my window, which was only a few feet away, and tried to ask me something. The man quickly asked me where a certain address was, after I cracked the window a little. I did say I didn't know though. It's possible that I could have looked it up, or given him a general idea, but something seemed very wrong. It was even stranger that he didn't react or show any feeling when I told him I didn't know. After standing there in quiet for a second, he asked the same question again. This is when I began to feel really scared and nervous. By rolling up my window and moving forward, I told him I had to leave quickly. The man did not do anything while I drove away. He was just standing in the middle of the road, watching me drive away. I could see him in my rearview mirror. I parked on a close street next to a house and then took a moment to gather my thoughts. It was a very strange event, but should the cops have been called? I had no idea. The thought of calling the cops at work is very upsetting, and I didn't want to do it unless I had to. But the main thing that kept bothering me was why he was looking for that address. I put it into my GPS and saw that it was only a few minutes away in the neighborhood I was watching. I got back on the road and drove to the spot. When I got there, it looked like any other house at 1 a.m. There were no people outside, and the lights were all off. I parked on the other side of the street and waited. It wasn't even 30 seconds before I saw the man in the hood walking down the path toward the house. From my car, I saw him walk up their path and to their front door. Someone knocked a few times, then waited a while and knocked again. Someone didn't answer the door for almost a minute. The man with the hood slammed into the house and fought his way inside. I was shocked to see something like this happen right in front of me for the first time. But I kept my cool and called the cops as soon as I could. I was scared as I waited, and for 2 or 3 minutes I didn't see anyone move. I thought about whether I should go in and try to help the homeowner. But to be honest, I was scared and didn't want to make things worse. So I stayed in my car. In an instant, the front door moved a little and then swung open quickly. The man in the hood ran out and down the street. It took almost 10 minutes for the cops to show up. What took so long? I'm sure no one was to blame, but I was mad about it. The man had already left by that time, and the homeowner was lying inside, knocked out from being hit so hard. For the next few days, more bad news kept coming in. The homeowner had no idea who the man was and barely remembered what had happened. He didn't steal anything from his house either. This was very strange because the man knew the address of the house, and his only goal was to hurt the homeowner. So it didn't make much sense that the suspect wasn't someone he knew. Something about the whole thing felt off, and I still do. Still, it's only been a week since this happened, so let's hope more information comes to light and the man in the hood is caught. Third story. A few years ago, this happened. I had just finished and was enjoying my summer break to the fullest. I got a full-time job at the high school where I had just graduated because I needed the money for college. My family asked me to go with them to my grandparents' house in Virginia, but I said no because I had already bought tickets for a show that day. There was no reason for me to stay behind. Why wouldn't an 18-year-old want their own house for a whole week? Also, I didn't have to worry that my neighbors would complain about the parties or give me any trouble because most of them were already gone. That day, I really wanted fried chicken, which made me leave the house. On my way back, there was an accident on the main road that blocked the whole line of cars, so I chose to cut across and relied on Google Maps to guide me home. When I went by the repair shop on the way, I saw that a light was on. What was that? It was another car, but this one had only one working lamp, which was very strange. I remember thinking it was really strange that this car's light suddenly came on as I was driving by, and I was even more confused when it drove off behind me. At the same time, I knew that I tend to be anxious and that I often wonder if someone is watching me and if they are trying to hurt me. I brushed off the thought as an odd accident and went on with my day. As I got closer to my neighborhood, I became more upset when I saw that the car was still following me. The fact that I was running low on gas made me even more scared. At this point, I could either turn around and drive home while the strange car follows, or I could just drive around and see if it does. I wasn't sure what I would do if my car ran out of gas in the middle of the road, leaving me stuck with this creep, so driving around seemed like a very bad idea. I thought it would be safer to take a chance in a place I knew than on the side of a dark, lonely country road. Once I made up my mind, I pulled onto my street. The car with one headlight turned right behind me, and I felt my heart drop. I thought I was going to die at this point. They started to follow me as I pulled into my driveway because there was nothing else I could do. It scared me to death. Now that I think about it, I think I should have called the cops, but I was thinking about other things at the time, and the thought never even crossed my mind. The rest of my family was 12 hours away, so I might have called my dad. If he were home, he would have gotten his gun. I pulled over and put my car in reverse. As soon as the car started to follow me up the driveway, they turned around and stopped at the bottom, blocking my way out. I tried to move forward again, but everything kept happening over and over again. They followed me as I drove. I turned around, and they blocked my escape several times. Finally, I quickly pulled my car further up the road and turned it around to face them. They had walked over more than half of my driveway already. I was scared by myself and very angry. I opened the door to my car and stepped out with my small pocket knife firmly in my right hand. My headlights were shining right into their faces. I used to keep a small knife between my seat and the car door because, as I said before, I've always been suspicious. I yelled at them while holding the knife out. I only hoped that they would get scared. They might have thought I was a girl or weak, or they might not have thought I would respond so strongly. Slowly, they pulled out of my driveway and made their way down the street. They stopped their car next to a neighbor's house, and I could see someone get out of the car in the dark. Finally, I could think straight again, so I ran inside and called the cops right away. Then I went to the front window and looked out at the dark streets of the neighborhood. There was no one moving. I was getting even more scared than I was when I was standing in the yard because my adrenaline was running out. At that very moment, I heard footsteps running around the outside of my house. Then I heard a nearby window shaking as someone tried to force it open. The man kept running around the house, checking every door and window to see if he could force them open. He looked terrified and out of his mind with fear. Even though I knew everything was locked, I was still afraid he would find a way to get in. I quickly went upstairs and locked myself in my room. I then called 911 again to find out what was going on. I was glad to hear that they were nearby, less than a minute away. I heard yelling as the man hit the front door and stomped on it. Just in time, though, 2 police cars pulled into the driveway. The man didn't run or anything, which was a surprise. Through the windows, I saw them handcuff him, and then I went outside to meet the police. The man tried to tell a police officer that he wasn't breaking the law, but the officer didn't believe him. To cut a long story short, it found out that the man was very drunk and impaired by drugs at the time. For some reason, he never told me why he was following me or trying to break into my house. But it couldn't have been a good thing. I'm glad I won't have to worry about seeing him for a while.